Hi everyone, welcome to this panel discussion with Glyn Maxwell, who is a writer in many different formats, poetry, opera librettos, novels, plays, and many pieces that kind of merge all those things, which is one of the things we'll be talking about tonight. Really pleased to have you with us, Glyn, and of course you have worked with OperaUpClose 4 on the amazing, complicated, mad libretto for the Magic Flute, and now are working on an amazing, complicated, and probably quite mad libretto for the Flying Dutchman. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Really nice, really nice.
So you're going to start off this evening, I think, by reading some of your poetry, an extract from Time's Fool, which you published 20 years ago, and I'll leave you to introduce it.
Okay, so 20 years ago, I wrote an enormously long poem called Time's Fool, which is essentially the Flying Dutchman by other means, in this case by train rather than ship. I wrote it in Terza Rima's, the Dante form, because I felt it was that kind of show. This is the very beginning of it, and I'm going to read this very beginning of the poem because of the R&D that we're going to do on Flying Dutchman in 6 weeks or so, less even. I've started writing words for the Dutchman. I've started writing words for the choruses and so on, and trying to figure out how to do it. So suddenly I'm back in the realm. This is from 20 years ago. In my version, called Time's Fool, the fellow does a terrible deed at 17, which is equivalent to the Flying Dutchman's cursing the devil or betting against the devil. There are various versions of the Flying Dutchman. Same sort of thing happens in mine, but it's unraveled in time. We meet him after he's been spending every 7 years on this train, which goes nowhere, which goes to places he doesn't understand. And every Christmas Eve, every 7 years, he comes back to his hometown and he gets off the train and he tries to figure out what's going on and how the curse can be lifted. So this is the very beginning of it, from Time's Fool. When the train stopped, I started and woke up, was nowhere as before. No change in that. Nothing new in trundling to a stop where nothing seemed to call for one. The light was winter afternoon, with afternoon a term for darkness. In the cold and wet were trees beside the line, grey evergreen, unknown by name. And not a soul to hail, I said again, and with a smile so thin it died before its life. And not a soul, I called. The sky was murk, its memory of sunshine like my memory of school, of sunshine in the morning. Next to me, my hands were inching off the dirty felt towards each other, meeting gingerly, lovers twining, brothers known and held, then strangers upright like the poor in prayer. My eyelids met in secret, my eyes filled with vision, then reopened on nowhere. I craned against the glass to see ahead and did see lights along the way so far, but into nothing known. And I sat forward, hands set on my knees, and weighed down with swallowing, I scanned them. What I said when I was ready, I had voiced alone so many times. I said, this is the day of freedom. If the day will prove me wrong, the day will never come, and I'm away forever.
Thank you very, very much. So that's wonderful to hear, and immediately there's a sense of place and no place, which is very much part of the Flying Dutchman. So there's something about this myth that obviously fascinates you. Can you articulate what that is?
Yeah, I'll try. So I suppose I started thinking of this for 2 or 3 years before I wrote it, and this was the myth. I can't remember a decision to make this the myth. I think it happened in the early morning hours, but that's where things happen. I think I was in the States. I had suddenly gone out there, got married, become a father, had a job, had a house, suddenly living in Western Massachusetts. And all of this had happened within a year. And suddenly life was really different. And I think I was kind of homesick, and was imagining home and imagining the thing about my Flying Dutchman, my Time's Fool, is that I thought I'd make a change to that the version that came to Wagner, which came from the German writer whose name I've forgotten for the first time ever, that he read the story in. The story which, there's loads of versions of it, but the story that includes the details that every 7 years he tries again. And in that story, and in the opera, he's trying to find the woman that will declare, as you all know. I thought what I wanted to do was I made two changes. Well, apart from the train, okay, the train for the ship, that's a big change, all right? It's not a big change. That's not a big change. The big change was that he stays the same age, which I suppose is the same as the Flying Dutchman. You have a sense of an aged, undiable, a person who can't die. But my hero is 17, and the thing is that he every time he goes back to his hometown on Christmas Eve, he's still 17, and everyone else is 7 years older. So his girlfriend of the time starts to wonder who the hell he is. His parents give up on him and eventually think he's some sort of relative, a grandchild. So everyone, he drifts away from him. So I think this was a metaphor for suddenly being in a foreign country. So suddenly time would be different. Suddenly time would have more impact, because I'd go back occasionally, once a year to Britain, and people would have changed and moved on. And it was, so 30s is a time of life where people are settling into different things. And I think it was trying to express that sense of change, the sense of, I think specifically the sense of youth being over, and something else kicking in. But essentially a kind of that Welsh hiraeth thing, that sense of nostalgia for homesickness for something that maybe was never there. But I think that's the wellspring of it.
Yeah, it's kind of horrifying.
Yeah, I think because I'd regarded my life as very fortunate and benign, I think perhaps I had to impose something horrifying on it in order to give a sort of cosmic balance. So that's why I was so delighted when you talked to me about Flying Dutchman 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, I thought, OperaUpClose is such a fantastic thing, and I just thought, if you give Flying Dutchman to anyone else, it's just not fair.
Yeah, so we have actually been talking about this on and off for quite a long time, and I think that's probably a good thing. I think it's OperaUpClose's first Wagner, and that's actually been a little bit of almost a joke for certain critics or audience members. Oh, when's OperaUpClose going to do Wagner? Because Wagner is seen as the biggest, and we are among the smaller. But actually, I think we really wanted to make sure we do it brilliantly, as with everything we do. But there's something about this story that, although it is huge, he's traveling the world, it's also very small.
Because it's just about the coast and a ship at sea. It's thinking of OperaUpClose, thinking of anyone now on the coast of the present who tries to adapt everything, that the past is out there as this ocean of stuff, and we're grouped on the coastline trying to figure out what it means to us. And yes, I hadn't quite sunk. Of course, you haven't done Wagner. I knew you hadn't done Wagner, and yes, and that's why it was really good to choose somebody who is immune to, who is old enough to not really know too much about the world of it. So I you know, you haven't tuned in to hear me talk about the music, although it's working its way absolutely into me and is remarkable and extraordinary. My job is something else, but I leapt on it because we're all just on a coast looking out to the sea. I mean, that's what we all are, and that's what life is like. And the Flying Dutchman for me is a soul trying to figure out why he's going through what he's going through, or she's going through what she's going through, whoever it is. But there will just be this one encounter. Maybe art is all that one encounter of the person at sea and the folks looking out to sea. And I think there are deep kind of commonalities, deep elements to the story that are timeless. Wagner would have thought they were timeless. There are things you have to change. That's why, you know, I have round the clock protection and so on. But there are things there are things you have to change to make it work now.
So coming back to another version of this story 20 years later, when you're in a different part of your life, a different place, all those things. You talked about the kind of the way your personal situation fed into your work with Times Full, which it inevitably does, even if we try not to. That happens, right? What are you aware of what difference where you are now in your life is going to have on this version?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so I wrote the Times Full at around in my late 30s, and even then, I felt that the answer to this particular cosmic puzzle is not finding woman who will be true unto death. I thought if I'd written it in my 20s, that's what I'd have gone for. But I didn't think it then. And, you know, I'd obviously like people to read it, so I don't really want to give away the ending, but it's really, it's a long book, it's in terza rima, so that'll put off many people, as it indeed has. But the solution in Times Full is that the fellow, still at the age of 17, although, you know, he basically makes his peace with time, passing. So it's not about, so he tries everything. He tries everything like Wagner's fellow tries everything, suicide and killing, murder in the gallows and drowning and running his ship aground. He tries all of those versions in suburban Hertfordshire on his train. He tries all of those things. He keeps waking up, and he also tries true love. He also tries somebody who'll swear love unto death, but that's not it either. So I think with this one, so 20 years on, I feel yes, it's not someone who will swear love unto death, and you know, it's not particularly making peace with time either. I think that was a younger thing, although time is always important to me. But there is something else about this, which is about a sacrifice. I mean, we have to say that I'm still, the plot is still bubbling away. I'm still figuring it out, so I don't really know the entire shape of it. But yes, you're right. 20 years on, I do feel it will, as you say, inevitably be inflected by what I go through and how the age I am and grandfatherhood. I mean, all these things will creep in somehow. Lockdown, they'll all be there. They'll all be there in the vowels. You know, it's not something you can, you know, it's not something you can you can prevent. But that is the profoundly serious way to do it. Is to do it with the that sort of shrug of the moment now, to say this is the moment the ocean, the tide meets the coast. This is where we are. So we'll do it how it sounds now.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about how you work, what your approach to something like this is? Because you've written brand new librettos, original stories. You've written adaptations, for example, Firework Maker's Daughter, you know, adapted from a novel, and this is an adaptation of an existing libretto, but quite an extremely new version of that. Is your approach different, and what's the first thing you do, and so
on? There's so many different ways about it. When I think about it, I've tried so many things. I think that the thing they all have in common is honor. To honor the work. I would never want to go into something at odds with it. For example, for example, I mean, we don't have to talk about our sense of Wagner's politics, or we don't have to talk about that. That doesn't matter actually for me doing this. But thinking about two recent plays I did, The Wind in the Willows and the Jungle Book. Yeah. So you're talking about English classics that are written by people with singular politics that are not at all my politics, not at all what I sense is best for the world. But you honor the story, you honor the imagination. There's love. I mean, I grew up with those things, and with those, you just start by saying, can you arrive at this at the same angle in terms of love of what you're saying? Because I think whatever the politics are, just about all great writing has love at the heart of it, and fellow feeling, and the capacity to imagine the feelings of others, to empathy, the capacity to care what others feel. And you can look back at writers and say, well, they were a bit right-wing, or in the modern style, say, well, they were fascists, in that sort of nonsensical, crude way. But in fact, Jungle Book is full of love, and so is Kenneth Grahame. I mean, but it's the social structures you don't really believe in, and so I just address them differently. So there's that. There's thinking about the ethos, and thinking, well, the ethos isn't as important as the story, and the love for the characters, and the triumph of imagination that has allowed those characters to last 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, in Shakespeare's case, etc., much longer. In plays, I go about it by transcribing every bit of dialogue they say to get the voices. With opera, well, I just say, I mean, this is a big question, but there are two completely different forms of libretto. Obviously, there's writing with a living composer, which I've done a fair bit of, and there's writing, as I've done for OperaUpClose, for Wolfgang or Richard, which is very different things. But in the first case, with the living composers I've written with, we go with the story from the beginning. We figure out the story. I play the major role there in being the sort of storyteller, and then it's back and forth. Here's a load of words, and the composer starts working on them. Comes back to me, says, "Can we have a bit more of that? Can I have a bit more of that? A bit less of that? Can I repeat this thing? This bit's boring." And there's like months, months of just like me, and then months of like David Bruce or Elena Langer or whoever it is. With Wolfgang and Herr Wagner, which it's totally different. It's totally different. It's just like trying to know the thing so well that you can make the word sit on it. The words sit on the quavers and semi-quavers and so on. With Mozart, I just began utterly daunted, Robin, I should say that, utterly daunted, and wondering what I'd let myself in for, and wondering how I could retreat from this commission.
Well, you did it well. I was not aware.
But I had the Bergman film of it. I had the score. I had my laptop to write things on. I had notes to take. I had my little creatures to be the characters, so that I knew what was going on.
I mean, no one knows what's going on the magic flute at the best of times.
No, that's right. I felt utterly liberated to do the magic flute. But I'm just saying that the complexity and the dauntedness of beginning on the magic flute, by the end of writing that, I simply knew it so well that I had it in my head in the train, and I could think of how the words might sit on it. So it's knowing it. And I don't know Flying Dutchman as well as I knew magic flute at that time, but it's getting there. And the bits I've written for the R&D we're doing in July, I do know those really well. So it's just, you keep listening to it and you start to hear where English words can settle, English words can land. And that involves all sorts of things like, well, vowels, long vowels, all the stuff so this is the thing. The first time you ever talked to me about libretto, Robin, you said, I am occasionally going to encounter this terrifying monster, which is encapsulated in the phrase, the singers think. And I've always been grateful for that, because I've always thought, right, don't upset the singers. I don't want the singers to they will, but you know, it was good advice.
Good. Yeah, I mean, it's important, of course. Well, it's important, of course, to respect all our collaborators. It's important to respect the singers, and of course, for it to be singable and glorious to sing. But equally, sometimes I think as a librettist, you need to push back, and because a singer will, not all singers, but some singers will want to sound, for their voice to sound as beautiful as possible, at maybe the expense of the precise meaning that you as a writer want to convey, perhaps. So it's always a negotiation.
That's absolutely right, because essentially, if in Wagner, where the notes are often really long and sometimes they're weirdly short, you know, and it's German, so it's like, that's not a language I'm that familiar with, but there's some flexibility in the way things would be said, and I know this will all come out in the R&D, and I'll learn more about it. But certainly, there's a way I hear the words, the way they drape over the line, over the music. But Laura, the composer, will probably have a take on that, and Lucy, the director, will have a take on that, and the singers will have a take on that. And as you say, for a poet who sits there alone, being number one in the room, it's great to work on libretto where I'm about number 11 in the room.
Do you feel you have to hear it sung? I mean, it sounds like an obvious question, but does that change? Do you often go away and change things having heard it sung?
No, unless I've been asked to, and it's been demonstrated to me why I should. I would definitely listen to that. That hasn't really come up. I think the real big contrast in terms of practical terms between playwriting and libretto is that things get set much quicker. They get set earlier in libretto, right? So, you know, with the situations we're all working in, the protocols we're all working in, it's not like we're massively funded and we can take weeks doing things. So it costs a lot to change a syllable, right? You know, you have to tell the singers, you have to tell the players. I mean, it costs more than in theatre, where they just expect the writer to be able to do it overnight, which, you know. So I sort of feel things get set sooner. Yeah, in Flying Dutchman, we'll go into that, and if there are troubles, they'll be addressed. I mean, I love that sort of collaborative thing, but it didn't come up with the Mozart particularly. Yeah, then the Mozart was a dream gig. It's a dream gig because structurally it's nonsense. Everyone loves Mozart in lots of ways. I mean, as a character, so I felt that Mozart would understand. So, you know, Wagner I don't know about. I haven't really met him. But Wolfgang, I just thought, well, he'll get it. He doesn't mind that I'm turning this aria into a duet where they're online doing Tinder. You know, he's not going to mind. He'd have done that. and the plot is a mess, and it needs cutting because, for practical terms, to get it on in the night. And it needed then and with Magic Flute we needed to have fewer characters because there were fewer singers, and that gave me all sorts of ideas of how to do things, like getting rid of monostatos and making it a sort of dreamed version of Tamino. You know, that sort of thing I would not have thought of if I had the full panoply.
Yeah, which actually solved one of the big modern problems of staging Magic Flute, which is that monostatos is such a problematic character.
Not have him.
Yeah. So yeah, you sort of touched on it a bit, and I agree with you about Mozart, or certainly our kind of culturally, influenced by Peter Shaffer Amadeus version of Mozart, that he'd have we feel like he'd have welcomed the silliness and the irreverence of your version and lots of versions of the Magic Flute. Who knows if that's right? But does the fact that these operas have such a long performance history and audience expectations and cultural associations, does that sit heavy on you? Do you just have to ignore it?
It doesn't, and I do. the thing, yeah, I mean, I should say that in terms of irreverence at Mozart, is that Mozart was irreverent about things that one should be irreverent about, and serious about the things one should be serious about, and so am I. So I was absolutely reverent towards the music. I wasn't reverent towards the Freemasons because it just seems like a boys' club, and it didn't matter to me, and I didn't think it was helpful in the plot. Okay, so let's talk about audience expectations.
And maybe with Wagner comes with particular enthusiasts.
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah. So does OperaUpClose, I would like to point out. So I would think anyone who's deeply admiring of something as sort of magnificent as Wagner would have the psychological breadth to welcome takes on it. Like I'd apply the same to Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare purists are pretty few and far between, right? And who's a Shakespeare purist? No one really knows how these things were done. So Wagner purist, I could imagine that one might be a Wagner purist musically, but I have to stick up here for the guild of storytellers, because along with the magnificence of the music, dramaturgically, Flying Dutchman is very thin. Yeah, it's got really passionately strong idea about the central figure and the lady who wants to love him until death. But dramaturgically, it's not skillful, right? In the sense that, you know, the long scene with the Darland and the Flying Dutchman and Centaur, they all want the same thing. It's a very long scene for everyone to want the same thing. I'm not being defensive, because Robin, you knew what I'd do with this, and you knew I'd say things like this.
No, and I've seen, I've seen your plan for it, and I think it is incredibly respectful and loving of the greatness of the piece, and I think that applies to Laura's approach as well. She absolutely loves Wagner, but in a way, for me, my take has always been with these great operas, and you're right to bring up Shakespeare, it's a comparison I often make, is that if the greater the work of art, the more it can take loving reinterpretation.
I absolutely believe that, which is why it's so frustrating. For example, like the Beckett estate. The Beckett estate is so pinching about what you can do with Beckett. And it's like, if you believe that Beckett's great, then let it open it up. Let's see what we can do with it, So, look, I don't want to talk to the entirely converted, but OperaUpClose is such a fantastic thing that allows these reinterpretations, that forces reinterpretations, that forces it to look at the moment, forces it to not just be on the shoreline with the past out there as the ocean, but to go right up to the edge of the sand and look out there and figure it out. What is the sound of it now? You know, what is that story now? And that's been my that's how I'm thinking about this. And you're right about Laura. I mean, we had Zoom calls with Lucy, the director, and Laura, the composer, and I totally get that from both of them. They totally love the score. They love the story. They love Wagner, but Laura is irreverent in just the way I am. It's like, you know, I say this is half an hour without any dramaturgical interest to it, and she's like that about the music. And she'll say something like, "I hate that bassoon there," whatever it is. But I recognise that as like, you know, there's a glory to it, but the light of the glory has fallen on you, and you're alive now, so it's up to you to respond in some way.
Yeah. Can we talk more generally about writing opera librettos and how you came to that? And I don't know what, for example, your musical background is, and was writing librettos something that has always sat alongside your other work, or is it, how did you move into that?
No. I learned piano, and I had a vague grasp of keys and music as a kid. I liked theory. I liked musical theory most. I was too lazy to practice properly, and I didn't have much classical at all. I grew up with musicals and rock music and so on. I knew things, but I didn't have any until, well, it was John Ford James who ran, you know, the opera group, which was then Mahogany. John knew composer Elena Langer, the Russian composer, and she was looking for an English poem to set to music. This is Ariadne to Theseus, and I did that 2003 maybe. So John introduced me to Elena, and we worked on 2 or 3 things, and I really enjoyed it. I thought, I can do this. I can have a real go at this. I really enjoy doing this. And then there was Luke Bedford. We did 7 Angels, about the end of the world, as you do. And then John Ford James was kind of the thread right through this. Introduced me to David Bruce, and we did Firework Maker's Daughter, and we did Nothing at Glyndebourne, and we're trying to figure out what to do next. And that's been a great relationship. I mean, I'm friends with all of the people, but with David, it's been really exciting, because we're both suburban people who feel the light falling on us, you know. That's how I got into it. It's been years now. But then when you came along with Magic Flute, that was a whole other thing, because that wasn't like work, that wasn't collaborating with a composer to build something out of nothing. That was, you know, knocking on the door of genius and saying, can I work with you?
But genius couldn't reply.
Yeah, well, that's right. He doesn't pick up the phone. Well, Mozart doesn't. But I don't know. Look, there's no mystery to this. You have chosen the 2 operas I would most like to work on. Magic Flute, because okay, there's 2 things with Magic Flute. One is that it's late, so and it's different from the others because it's in German, right? And it was like a musical thing. It's not high in the sense that it was not performed for emperors. It was this chicanada deal, and it just felt thrown together like lots of the things you and I have worked on. It just felt like fringy. Given it's fucking Mozart, it was fringy, right? The Magic Flute, and so I loved that about it. And the other reason is Auden. I thought Auden did this. Auden wrote libretti. He wrote them with Chester Kalman. They're okay. You see, I think Auden is the greatest poet of the 20th century. I think Auden's the greatest poet after Shakespeare. So finding his libretto with the magic flute and thinking I can do this better was fun for somebody like me, because I'll never be able to do poetry better than him. But I thought a lot of English libretti are sort of archaic. They're sort of backwards looking. They sort of make the grand opera nature of it takes them to Mallory and takes them backwards in time. And I thought that happened with Auden's magic flute. Although it's good on the syllables and good on the vowels, I just thought it's looking back, and I thought we could do this in modern English. We can do this now. So magic flute was just a wonderful delight for me to be able to work on, and the music is just incandescent. So there's all that. And then, of course, this one, because of the story, because I've been drawn to this story my whole life. Probably I should get out more, but I was delighted when you came up with this one. I thought, yeah.
Well, I should say, I don't want to give too much away at this point, but I think I read the synopsis of Glyn's version of this. Just even the synopsis, I found myself welling up, and I think it's going to be incredibly moving, and it will be on a very grand scale as well as a very intimate scale. But it's interesting. I just wanted to pick up. It's interesting that it's with the OperaUpClose reimaginings that it is a new strand to your libretto writing, because actually you mentioned Jungle Book and Wind in the Willows, and you've also done I think some Enid Blyton and all sorts of reimaginings of really well-loved stories and plays for the Story House in Chester. And so there's clearly something in you that is drawn to something well-loved that you can reinvent.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I didn't expect to write so many adaptations, but that's the work that came up, and I realized I love doing it. I think it's with Chester, it's a little bit like, this because you did, my 12th Night sequel. I'm coming over as really humble here. The sequel I wrote for 12th Night.
Yeah, I've directed a couple of Glyn's plays, which is what he was talking about in terms of our thrown together things. I think Masters Are You Mad, which was the sequel to 12th Night, was completely bonkers, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah,
but really fun.
Completely fair to say. I like the idea. You see those plays in Chester and the amphitheatre, and they've opened up again, and it's all lovely and so on. And you see families sitting there. And I like plays where I put in a joke which the mum and dad gets, or just the mum gets, or only the elder brother gets, or only the younger sister gets. And I like, bliss for me is like the older sibling trying to explain to the younger sibling why that's funny, or explain to the parent, or the parent. I love all that stuff. I love to have all of those jokes in it, all of those kind of levels in it. I think I got to a point, and I'm still at that point. Well, we'll see. Theatre's just opening up again, so we'll see what shape it's in after what we've gone through. But I certainly felt that theatre's, certainly in London, where I experience it mostly, it was just ploughing a furrow from age 18 to 34, and like it was only for them. It was only articulating the psychology of that kind of age group, which is let's be mysterious, let's be cool, let's not be understood, let's surprise, let's fragment, let's fracture. And I mean, I've been around that in poetry all my life, and it's like, oh, really? Why don't you just tell a story people get? Why don't you tell an old story in a new way, right? And that's what OperaUpClose does, and that's what Alex Lifton at Chester does, and that's what I've done whenever I've worked with either of those groups. Let's tell an old story in a new way.
And in fact, I wanted to give a shout out here to your amazing, I don't even know what it is. Is it a novel, Drinks with Dead Poets? Is it a poetry guide? Which is, I'll describe it badly. It's a kind of poetry lecturer who I always think is you, but it probably isn't, but keeps on finding that these famous poets are guest lecturers. And so, you know, you have, I can't, it's a long time since I read it, but I absolutely loved it. You have, you know, A Crazy Night Out with Byron, and Emily Dickinson turns up and is marvelous, but also very, very odd. And yeah, so again, that, I don't know, yeah, can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I'd say in introduction to that, I'd simply say that just about everything I've written in the last 20 years has been a sort of fusion of different genres that salespeople regard as unusable. So, just about everything I've done is like uncommercial in almost a violent sense. Anyway, so Drinks with Dead Poets. I was writing a book called On Poetry, which is a guidebook to poetry, and I realized I would enjoy this more if I pretended.
It was commercially successful, was it not? I mean,
On Poetry was the only thing I've ever done that was commercially successful. I decided it was just a guidebook to poetry for the general reader, and that was the commission. And I thought it would be more fun if I pretended to have 4 students. So I made up these 4 students. They're all versions of either people I taught or people I studied with, or me. And I thought, wow, this is much more fun now that there's kind of live presences in the space. So when that came out and that went well, I thought, well, I want to do a whole book of these. But well, let's bring in famous poets as well. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll go into Keats and Dickinson and the Brontes and Edgar Allan Poe and Whitman and anyone I kind of like, who's sort of like been some sort of influence, and go through their letters and diaries and journals and pull things out that they could have said in a pub or a cafe, right? Or tea room in Emily Dickinson's case. But in certainly with a lot of the men, it's like in a pub. John Clare, you know, he's there. The Brownings are there. And I just thought, okay, so let's pretend I wake up in this village and it's always Thursday and I always have to teach a class.
And there we are, we're back at Times Full and the Dutchman.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Although I have to say, Drinks with Dead Poets is loads more fun for me. Loads more fun. So it was a delight to conceive of that, because I was just lifting things that people had actually said and pretending they were saying them to me or to my class in the pub, or as I met them at the station. And it was a lovely thing, and I made up loads of students and got a whole story going. So you're right. I mean, I don't think it even occurred to me how like the Flying Dutchman that is.
In a sort of fun poetry lecturer on holiday way.
Yeah, it's always Thursday, and you're always teaching it too. Yeah.
And so, am I right in thinking that everything that the poets say, you haven't made up? They have written it somewhere. Yeah.
Everything they say, they really said.
Yeah. Great. Well, anyway, there's a big recommend from me for both On Poetry and Drinks with Dead Poets, and of course for Glyn's version of The Flying Dutchman, which we're going to be in research and development for in July, all assuming we're allowed to be in Manchester with Manchester Camerata, and then working on that for the rest of this year, and it will be sailing to port cities all around England in autumn 2022. So thank you so much, Glyn. It's always really delightful to talk to you, and thank you for reading an extract from Times Full. And I should also mention the first opera libretto you mentioned, the Elena Langer English touring opera, are about to produce as an online show. So everyone who's signed up via Eventbrite, we might send you some links to things that we've mentioned in case they're of interest, if you want to see some more of Glyn's work, not just with OperaUpClose. Thank you all very much for joining us, and see you soon. Bye.